Welcome back to CEEN Caribbean News. It's now time for Indepth. The latest mosquito-borne disease sparking fear in the region is the Zika virus. This is the third known disease spread by the Aedes aegypti mosquito and was first discovered in Brazil in early 2015. There are suggestions that the virus is responsible for birth defects in newborns. To study that belief, a team of professionals from the world's major health organizations is in Brazil conducting in-depth research on the illness ahead of the Olympics later this year. As time progresses, the virus is spreading its wings. According to the Pan-American Health Organization, PAHO, the countries in which the Zika virus is present in the region include Brazil, Puerto Rico, Panama, Venezuela, and Martinique. To help us understand how quickly this mosquito virus is spreading throughout the region, we have been joined by telephone by Dr. Karen Polson-Edwards. She is the Senior Technical Officer of Vector-Borne and Neglected Tropical Diseases in the Department of Communicable Diseases and Emergency Response of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA. Welcome to In-Depth, Dr. Polson-Edwards.
Thank you much.
First off, what is the Zika virus?
Well, Zika is a virus which is transmitted, as you probably know by now, by the Aedes aegypti mosquito. It was first isolated in the Zika forest in Uganda, hence the name Zika. A lot of these viruses have the names of where they originated. And usually the outbreaks would happen in Africa, sometimes in Asia. But what has happened since 2014 is that the virus has come across to the Americas, and so we have seen the start of outbreaks related to that particular virus. It is belonging to the same family as the virus that causes dengue, but a different family from chikungunya.
How does this Zika virus differ from the dengue and chikungunya viruses?
Well, in terms of the symptoms for the three, they're basically, some of them are similar, but in terms of the actual manifestations, you'd find with dengue, usually the person has a fever, but it's a higher fever, and they might have more severe muscle pains. But you can have complications with dengue, such as bleeding, which is what we refer to as severe dengue or dengue hemorrhagic fever. Then for chikungunya, you can also have a fever. The fever tends to be high too, and the joint pains will be more intense, as was evidenced by a lot of persons walking around who had had the infection, sort of like bending over due to the pain, which is debilitating for some people and can cause disablement. Whereas Zika, it's new to us in the region, so we're not too clear about some of the features that you may see. But what happens in a number of cases is that persons would have a fever, not as high as dengue or chikungunya, but then they may have rash on the skin and they may turn up with conjunctivitis. So the main differences are the conjunctivitis in Zika and the bending over pain in chikungunya and possible bleeding in dengue. But again, there are some instances where the symptoms are very similar, so it's not easy to tell the difference by looking at the person.
Okay, so say someone becomes exposed to the Aedes aegypti and possesses some symptoms or shows some symptoms of the illness that it would be common among all three illnesses. What process is used to distinguish each from the other?
It has to be by a laboratory test. The only way to distinguish or even to confirm that you have, whether it's dengue, chikungunya, or Zika, is through a laboratory test. And these tests are performed for dengue in some of the labs in our countries, but for Zika and chikungunya, the tests are performed in our laboratory at CARPHA using molecular tests that we call PCR, polymerase chain reaction tests. And for us to be able to do those tests, though, to confirm if the person has the illness, the blood sample would have to be taken within 3 days of the person showing any of those symptoms, and then sent to us here in CARPHA for testing. There are other tests that could be done if the sample is taken later, but the chances are that you would not get a definitive result.
Now, even though the Aedes aegypti carries all three viruses, it seems that outbreaks of each virus happens one at a time. Is that the case, really? And what would cause such a phenomenon?
No, it's not the case. what happens is that you can actually have the three illnesses circulating at the same time. As we speak in some of our countries, we still have cases of chikungunya happening at the same time. We still have dengue. What you must have for any of those diseases to be transmitted is that you must have the Aedes aegypti mosquito present, and you must have someone who is ill with the virus, and you also need to have what we call a susceptible human population. So persons who, for example, would have dengue. Dengue has 4 types, or what we call 4 serotypes, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you could get dengue 4 times, because for each type you become immune to it, but not immune to the other 3. And so what you would find happening is that somebody could come down with dengue, somebody could come down with Zika or chikungunya. It all depends if someone comes into the particular country and is sick with the virus at the time when the mosquito can pick up and begin transmission.
In Jamaica, there was much debate about whether the virus had reached that island after a doctor claimed to have treated over a dozen cases mid-last year. And we reported earlier that tests are being done for suspected cases from Barbados. Is there any evidence that the virus has spread beyond Latin America and Martinique?
Not at this present time. What would happen is that countries are actively doing surveillance to see if persons have fever and whatever other symptoms, and also if those persons possibly travel to some of the countries which PAHO has already identified, because PAHO is monitoring the situation in the Americas, whereas CARFA, we do monitor that situation, yes, but we're more focused on the Caribbean territories, mainly the English-speaking and the Dutch-speaking. And so at this point in time, we have not received the samples that we have tested that have been positive for the Zika virus.
Now, what measures are being employed by CARFA to ensure an outbreak of the Zika virus does not get to the magnitude experienced 2 years ago with chikungunya, especially in light of Olympics in Brazil this year?
What happens in CARFA's role is that CARFA has communication on a regular basis with the Ministries of Health in our 24 member countries, and we do messages for the public, whether it's via our website or media releases or interviews such as the one that we're doing now. We also liaise with countries in terms of giving technical advice and assistance as to how to implement effective strategies for preventing and controlling the disease. As it is, countries are already on alert, and the same measures that countries would have put in place for chikungunya and dengue would be the same measures for the Zika virus, because it's the same mosquito vector that we're looking at targeting. So those are some of the ways in which CARFA is helping. And also, as I'd mentioned before, with respect to testing the samples that we get to see if there is Zika actually circulating in any of the countries.
Thank you very much for speaking with us, Dr. Paulson Edwards.
You're most welcome, Candice.
We were just joined by Dr. Karen Paulson Edwards, Senior Technical Officer, Vector-Borne and Neglected Tropical Diseases in the Department of Communicable Diseases and Emergency Response of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA, discussing the intricacies of the Zika virus.